Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible come together to fulfill the story of God. I'm Jay.
I'm Abby.
I'm Fletcher.
I'm Cliff.
And today's story is about Moses' in-laws. We have a very special guest here today. This is our second guest on the show ever.
Ooh, second guest.
Our guest today is Bishop Cliff, who is also in this room, known as Uncle Cliff and Dad.
Yes.
Whoa.
So,
Who's who?
Not the same person, though. That would be weird.
yes. Speaking of
We'll
in-laws,
we'll
and
clarify.
all the-
Yeah. Speaking of in-laws, no, he's
So-
my uncle and Abby's dad.
That's
That's
right.
how it works.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, not any other weird combination. Yeah.
Right. So, Bishop Cliff, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what do you do, and why are you here today?
I'm here because I'm Abby's dad and Fletcher's.
We had some pull.
That's right. That's right. And I've been their uncle or dad their whole lives.
You were trying to remember the year there, weren't you?
No. Maybe a little bit. And as Bishop is just the overseer of the Free Methodist. So I'm pastor to the pastors and the churches. That's my job. That's my role nationally. And Canada also looks after Ghana and Sri Lanka. So I'm bishop in Ghana and Sri Lanka as well.
Great. And I personally, as a pastor within the denomination, appreciate your pastoral care. And I'm sure that those in the room who are related to you appreciate your relational care as well. So we have a question, which is the case each and every episode. Our question today, because we're dealing with in-laws, which biblical family would you want as an in-law, or which biblical family would you not want as an in-law? Actually,
Let's do both.
We're gonna
Yeah,
do both,
let's
right?
do both.
So which family would you like as an in-law, and which would you not want as an in-law?
Of course, I'm going to go first so I don't get stolen. I got a good idea for what I wouldn't want as an in-law, and I'm
Okay.
going to pick King Ahab and Queen Jezebel.
That's who I was going to say.
The kings of Israel. They're terrible, and I can't imagine they're very good to have as in-laws. I wouldn't want to marry their daughter. That'd be awful.
Right.
She'd cut off my head or something. She does with everybody.
Okay.
So
Yeah, there
that's
you go.
who I don't
That's
want.
Okay.
I haven't
Okay.
thought about who I do
You
want.
haven't thought about who- okay.
if anybody has an answer.
I'm thinking who I don't want as in-laws. When I read through the Gospels, I'm thinking Jesus's brothers, like his family, who treated him so poorly. I don't want them as in-laws. And like at one point, his brothers are like, "Hey, why don't you go to Jerusalem?" Which is kind of a backhanded way of saying, why don't you go end this all because you'll die in Jerusalem. So I wouldn't want them. I don't think I wouldn't like to be treated that way.
Or go home, you're crazy.
Go
kind
home,
of
you're
thing.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Okay.
at the same side, I think I would like Mary and Joseph as in-laws.
Okay. Okay.
I think from what I read in Scripture, I would appreciate their care and their concern, and when we see, especially the way that they react to being told about the birth of Jesus, I'm like, yeah, I'd like them as in-laws. They're pretty level-headed and calm and agreeable, and seem to be loving. They cared enough to go back to look for Jesus after a few days of him missing when he was in the temple. So that's good.
Okay. Do you have any, Dad?
Yeah. I was thinking who I wouldn't want, Daniel. Because I tried that Daniel diet once. It's nasty. And if that was what we were going to eat at family meals, no.
Yeah, you'd go over. Oh, what are we having for tonight?
Oh,
Yeah,
there's
Daniel.
more vegetables.
Vegetables.
That'd be awesome.
We got water too, if you'd like.
Yes, nothing to kill the taste. So Daniel came to mind. Who would I want? I was thinking too. John the Baptist parents, because she there's a whole lot of wisdom there. And then I really like Jeremiah. I'm a fan of Jeremiah. There's a whole lot of passion there, and so he'd be somebody else that when he gets older. Or Nehemiah was the other guy I was thinking.
Right.
Nehemiah, great storyteller, man of prayer. So when they got older, they'd be fun to sit down with. Those,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's funny is I was actually thinking Jeremiah kind of as not wanting because he's crazy.
Right. He
Like,
laid
they
on
did
his
some
side for
crazy
like
stuff.
14 years.
Yeah,
like,
and I don't know if I'd want that reputation following me. So that's funny. But since you've said it, I won't put that one on. Okay, this is hard. Shoot. I did have some in mind. I'm probably.
Are you
gonna
thinking
edit
about
this.
your real in-laws right now? Is that what you're like, what's good, what's bad?
No. Okay. I actually thought for maybe somebody that I would like, maybe Samson's parents. I know Samson didn't turn out great.
Samson's
But-
parents were good.
But his parents were pretty
Yeah.
great. They prayed for him a lot, and the Nazarite law thing, like they were dedicated to him. So, and I like that the wife. I think her name is that. This is bad. I'm saying this. Her name is actually mentioned, and I don't know her name, but is her name mentioned?
In Samson's parents?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
I don't know.
I'd have to look it up. He's got a
Well,
Bible. No, we'll look it up.
There we go.
We'll figure it
But
out
yeah,
later.
anyways, I like Samson's parents, and then Fletcher, you took mine for who I wouldn't want.
Yeah.
Who would I not want? Probably the other one that came to mind. I'll go with this one was Elijah, because again, that reputation. He did some nutso things, and he was a little crazy, and also he leaves Earth pretty quickly. So
So you wouldn't have any
He
in-laws.
wouldn't be a great grandparent or whatever. He's gone. So I'm gonna
Is
go.
Elijah coming to the Christmas gathering this year? Nope.
No,
He's
No.
gone.
No.
he's gone. He just disappeared.
When's he coming back, Dad? Well.
Don't think so. Fletcher,
So,
you didn't answer your second one.
I was going to continue and move on because we were going to forget. Oh, that's a good one. I want to say Joseph, not Jesus' father, but
Okay.
Jacob's son.
And
He's
the
a nice.
Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yeah.
Joseph, nice.
Although he wasn't good to his brothers, he kind of grew older. He was very responsible.
Right.
Nice
Yeah.
guy. Did good things.
Apparently, he was the most attractive one too.
There we go.
He's super-
Well, that's not
he's
necessary.
very
Well, maybe
handsome.
his kids will be cute then.
There you
if
go.
I'm marrying his
There-
daughter. There we go.
go. There you
Perfect.
go.
So, as always, we encourage you to read the stories for yourselves and to get the whole picture of what's going on. And today's story takes place in Exodus.
Yeah. Oh, and on that, we'd love you to tell us who you'd love to have as
Right.
in-laws, biblical in-laws,
who
or
you
not
would not.
love to have as biblical in-laws. So story@bfmc.org. Drop us a line.
Drop us
Or
an
if you have any other questions, comments, anything that you'd like to share that way.
All right. So, today's story takes place just before the Exodus, which is the big event that happens to Israel when they leave Egypt. So, Israel has been in Egypt for roughly 400 years. They used to live in the land of Canaan. That's where Abraham brought them. We talked about a lot of this last season. So, they're now in Egypt. And they're originally in good relationship with Egypt. This guy named Joseph was in charge there. He did good things there. We're not talking about that today, though. Right. So eventually, there was kind of the verse in Exodus is there came a Pharaoh that didn't remember Joseph. And now they've been enslaved, and that's not fun. So the Hebrews don't have a leader. They're enslaved in Egypt. And then it's at a time when the pharaohs were ordered that all the Hebrew baby boys would be killed. So Moses, this guy, was born a boy, and he was meant to be killed. And through the grace of God and a bunch of other stuff, he wasn't killed, and he ended up growing up as the Pharaoh's daughter's son, right, grandson kind of thing. So he grew up as an Egyptian. And then one day, when he was older, he saw an Egyptian beating a Pharaoh. Oh my goodness, beating a Pharaoh.
That wouldn't have gone well. That wouldn't have gone
No,
well.
one day he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he ended up killing the man for it, and then buried him in the sand. And then eventually he got caught for doing this, and he had to run.
Did he really bury him in the sand? I didn't
Yeah,
know
that's
that.
it's in the verse. He buried him in the sand.
Yeah, and he thought that he kind of got away with it, and then
Yeah.
the next day or what,
Yeah,
he saw
somebody.
two Hebrews in a disagreement, and he stepped in and he said, "Hey guys, like let's not argue." And they're like, "What are you gonna do? Kill us like you killed the Egyptian?" And he's like, "Oh boy,
crap!
I'm
Yeah,
out."
I feel like the sand would not be a great place to hide.
There's a lesson in there. Bury them deep and in the dirt, not in the sand.
Sand blows. They're in a
Yeah,
desert.
exactly.
There's another lesson in there too, but
Yeah, the don't murder part is probably a big one.
Are we
Don't
turning
murder,
into a true crime podcast? guys?
don't try and do God's job for him.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah. So, just historically speaking, and some of this Fletcher already touched on, but this is happening around the time of the Exodus. So, as Fletcher said, just before the Exodus, which places it most likely around 1400 BC. And historically, Egypt is in its new kingdom period, and so they're
thriving.
They're thriving. Yeah, things are going well. and the Pharaoh is to be feared and revered, and et cetera, et cetera. And then we have the we have the Amorites and the Canaanites living in the Palestine area. And we see that city-states are ruling all through Mesopotamia. And so some examples of that would be Babylon, and Nineveh as examples of city-states. And the Hittite kingdom is what's going on in the northern area, which is what we would see as Turkey in today's geography.
Yes, so geography. So there's a couple different stories here, but Zipporah and Jethro are from Midian, which is actually located in modern-day Saudi Arabia. I don't know why, but I'm always just shocked again when we find out it's another Middle Eastern country, even though I'm like, there's so much that's in the Middle East. But yeah, so Saudi Arabia, in the modern-day city of Al-Bad. So Moses really ran away. I actually looked up how far it was from Cairo to Al-Bad, and guess how many kilometers it is?
I know how many kilometers it is.
It's
I'm
written
reading
down.
it right now.
Oh.
It's written down. You should have kept it to yourself.
I should have. Then I wouldn't have remembered. It's almost 700 kilometers away. So remember, they didn't have cars. Like, that's a long journey. So this guy walked and maybe rode a donkey or something, or a camel.
He's gone for 40 years, so it's not like it was.
40 years, but 700 kilometers. So, yeah, so they were
He
in...
really ran. Like, that's how probably powerful
ran.
Egypt was. They would have found him anywhere.
Anywhere
else.
else, anything less than 700 kilometers. So I'll actually put a little map in the show notes to show that journey and like where that was. So Zipporah saved her husband, which we'll hear about later, somewhere on the journey back to Egypt from Midian, which again is Saudi Arabia. And then Jethro visits Moses and his family sometime during the early part of the desert wanderings. So again, somewhere between Egypt and Canaan, which we know Canaan is modern day Jordan and part of Israel as well. So that is where we're located today.
All right, so we have 3 stories actually that we're going to tell today, not just one. The first one is kind of how Moses meets Jethro and Zipporah. The second one is Moses and his wife Zipporah. And then the third one is Jethro and Moses. So we're going to start with the first story. It takes place in Exodus chapter 2. Moses has just killed an Egyptian man, and he needs to get out of there quick. So he leaves. He goes to a land called Midian, like we just talked about, and that's where the story starts. So he's sitting by the well, and these women, 7 women, come to fill their buckets with water to feed their flocks. And then these shepherds come up and start harassing them and trying to kick them out of there. And Moses actually steps in, helps them, and then feeds their flocks for them. What a gentleman.
Where'd he go? Where'd you go, Moses?
And then I'm reading this, and I'm like, this sounds really familiar.
Right.
And then I clicked on the 3 dots when I'm reading the Bible. You can see the reference. And it talks about how it's back in Genesis as well. I'm like, yeah, this is the same story that happened with Rebekah. They were at the well. And it's the same story that happened with Jacob and Rachel.
Right.
So that's my question is, why is it the same story? Why does everybody meet their wife at the well?
Hey, you single guys out there.
Yeah.
If you go
Hey.
to the well.
Go to the well. I don't have the answer to that, but when I was reading this, something else came to mind, which I might be stretching things. I don't know. But the bride of Christ meets Jesus at the well because he says, whoever thirsts will come to me. I spring forth springs of living water. And so just as I was reading that, I was like, oh, wow. Another bride that actually meets at the well, which is, us as the bride of Christ meet Jesus because he says that anyone who is thirsty, come to me and I will give you the water. So, yeah.
That's something really beautiful in Scripture, that there's these motifs that happen all through Scripture.
Yeah.
And, the numbers that 40 is pretty important in Scripture. And well and water, absolutely important in Scripture. And the new Moses, the new covenant, absolutely important. So it's beautiful that way, the connection that you're making.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
All right. So he meets the women at the well, and then the women go back to their father and they say, oh, this guy helped us. He saved us. He watered our flocks. And the dad goes, well, where is he? You didn't invite him back? He wants to marry off his daughters or something.
Right.
Anyway, so Moses ends up going back there and staying with the man, and his name was Jethro, and he was a priest in Midian. And we'll come back to that. He was a priest of a different land. He wasn't a Hebrew priest, because that's a different. So he's a priest from Midian. Moses then ends up marrying one of the daughters, and her name is Zipporah, and he has a son with her and names him Gershom, and it means I'm a foreigner, or I've come to this land. And Moses stays and works for him for about 40 years. So that's story number 1. Moses meets the two. He was a very gentlemanly. He helped the girls out at the well. So that's story number 1. Abby has story number 2 for us, and she's very excited to tell it.
So, first of all, I like Zipporah. I think she's a cool name. I think that, I don't know, I just picture her as like a really cool person, kind of like Princess Jasmine-esque, you know? Like just where she is, where she's very independent. She's like, I don't need like any help. I got my thing, but like,
I was talking to my mom today, and she was like, "Oh, you're doing Zipporah. That sounds like the beer." And I go, "What?" And my dad's like, "You mean Sapporo, the beer?" And I go, "Yeah, okay." So my mom's got beer on the brain when she's thinking of Zipporah. She said, "Don't say that. Don't say that on the podcast."
Don't say that on the podcast.
Naturally,
Fletcher.
it's on here.
It's on here. You're gonna get a text message.
Yeah, I will.
So here's story number 2. So Moses sees this burning bush and meets God there, the God of his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're not going to talk about that story today because we're not talking about Moses specifically today. We're talking about Zipporah and Jethro.
No main characters this season. We're not allowed. It's in the title. Helpers only.
Helpers. So God tells Moses to go back to Egypt to save his people from slavery. And Moses talks to Jethro and asks to go if he can go back to Egypt. Because again, this is a long distance, 700 kilometers. Unlike Laban in the story of Rachel and Rebecca, he says, go ahead and go back to Egypt. This is what God's saying. So while on the way to Egypt with his wife and kids, Moses meets God, and God tries to put him to death one night. It's a little dramatic, okay? But it's because Moses had forgotten one of God's laws, which at the time was you had to circumcise your son. And Moses had not circumcised his son. So God's on his way. This is a great picture. Ready? I want you guys all to close your eyes. Ready? Great picture. Little baby Gershom is sleeping. Zipporah's watching over him. God's coming over, looking at Moses, about to get him. And then Zipporah's like, wait, no. And Zipporah goes and she circumcises her son. And then God is like, okay, good job, and backs off. And she just saved his life right there.
Yeah.
She saved his life. And I thought that was so cool. It's such a weird story, but it's not, maybe that's not what you want to be known for, but it's great.
Well, and it speaks of a couple of things, I think. Zipporah is not a Hebrew. Mm-hmm. So circumcision, as far as we know from the text, is not a part of her culture. So either Moses told her about this, which how do you forget then to circumcise your son? But he either Moses was like, hey, I'm going to teach her all about my God and his ways, and she's learned of those, or I don't know what the or is actually.
She could have studied it. Like her father was a priest, right? So he might have had good education for his
and known of other.
Well, there's some good conversation out there that, it's entirely possible they were El worshippers, which is El, which is God worshippers. And it's entirely, everyone in that area would have known Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's God.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So they would have known something about they would have known traditions,
right.
Especially a priest. They would have known something of that. So it's entirely possible that was a God worshiper who didn't know the name yet, didn't know who he was. And so he embraced what he saw when Moses started telling the story and seeing what was happening. And so circumcision just could have been something they knew and could have been something they practiced.
Maybe they even practiced, yeah.
It's possible. Because she was ready to do it quick. She knew how to.
She knew how to. She took the knife and just did it.
I would not know how to do that.
No.
And it's not safe to do incorrectly, I guess. So, no.
Yeah.
So the question I had is, God was so angry at Moses for not keeping that covenant circumcision. And then, it's just out of nowhere. He comes, and God was going to kill Moses. I'm like, holy cow, it's that severe. That is, such an important thing to keep the covenant.
It really is. But and let's frame it carefully, because if anyone hears this and sees a God that looms over us and ready to kill on us, and the story is very unique. We know that for sure. We know that Moses is a really unique character in Scripture, and we know that God spoke with him. We know that they had something together. And when Moses was lazy in his thinking, God called him out a few times. We have these examples. Yeah. Moses lost out on the promised land. So we don't know everything about Moses' character, but we know God knows him.
Right.
So we know that some of this severe response is probably direct. It's not a principle we apply to us.
Course.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we don't walk around with a woman who carries a flint knife,
Right.
God's not there. That's not a principle in Scripture.
Right.
The principle is there was a relationship with Moses and God that we know. We watch it play out, and God called him on it because
Right.
he was called uniquely to be a deliverer.
Yeah.
There's no one else that carries that title.
Yeah. And then at the same time, I think we do also, we recognize very much the spiritual significance of circumcision. So the spiritual circumcision that needs to take place and how seriously God takes that we need to cut off our fleshly ways and have them removed completely and walk in the Spirit. And we get a better idea of that as we read Galatians, because they're actually arguing over physical circumcision, and Paul's making a case there for a spiritual circumcision that we do need to take as seriously as God takes in this instance with Moses.
Cool. So that's story number 2. Thank you, Abby, for telling it
You're welcome, Fletcher.
about circumcision. So this is the last story now. It's Exodus 18. So now Moses went back to the promised land, and he told Pharaoh to let his people go, and he delivered them from Egypt. And they've now crossed the Red Sea. We're not talking about this story. I say this all the time. We're not talking about this today, but I swear we'll come to it eventually. We want to tell a lot of stories. But they've crossed the Red Sea, and then the Amalekites attacked them instantly, like right away.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about that a little bit last season. So if you remember that, go watch the episode. So Moses, right after this, meets up with his father-in-law, who was with his wife and sons. Moses had sent Zipporah back with him. So Moses meets up with Jethro and his family, and they talk about everything that had happened and how God delivered them. And then Jethro, literally says, "Blessed be the Lord, for doing this. This is surely the one true God." And he, really, really goes out and says, this is God. And then he makes a sacrifice with Moses.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's what we were saying. He was a priest from a distance. He wasn't a Hebrew.
Right.
So,
which at this point we would say that he is now a worshiper of God.
So they perform a sacrifice. So Moses is the leader of Israel. He's the one that's sitting. He's the judge, and people are coming to him to ask God what's going on, to solve their problems. He's sitting as their judge. And Jethro sees this. He goes, "This is not good. The way you're doing this is bad. You're going to tire yourself out. You're going to tire your men out. This is what you need to do."
Mm-hmm.
And Jethro sets out this thing. So you'll have a leader appointed over every 1,000, every 100, every 50, and every 10. And to put the strain off of Moses and to put it on more of the people to have a balanced system. So Jethro basically sets up this government essentially on how to govern the Hebrews wisely and effectively. And that's the third story is Jethro's wisdom in that setting up. So delegation is good. I like that. My question is what's the lesson in that story, right? I like telling the stories. That's why I got these two smart people and Abby. What's going on? Sorry, I didn't mean it like that. I picked up on what happened there. Wrong, but
wow.
What delegation, getting help, the importance of what is it?
Listen, I'm not a smart person, so I don't get the answer.
Wow. Well, yeah. I mean, I think it is. It's good.
So leadership conferences pick up on this all the time, don't they?
Right.
They like the 3 pieces all the time are teach the law to other people so they have the law, and so give them vision,
right?
Give them a picture of what's going on here, and the more people that own this, Moses, the better, because if it's one guy, one leader, bad. Mm-hmm. Delegation is huge, right? That was part of the story. And then important cases belong to you. So this is taught as a leadership thing.
Right.
Good. You said it well. It's good.
It's good. Well, yeah, and I'm just thinking for you as a model of leadership, you must appreciate this, that the whole denomination is not all coming to you for all of the answers and advice and questions. They have pastors and leaders that they can go to, and some who maybe somebody would come to you and you would say, you know what, I think you do better to be speaking with this individual to run that issue by, or to work through that.
And the cool thing, we actually have some examples in the Bible of this actually happening and people going directly to Moses. We talked about Numbers 27 with the daughters. They're like, this is too big for us. We're going to pass it up to the man. And then Moses passes it to God.
Right.
So that was an important enough issue to bring to the leader of Moses.
The other piece, so that's good, right? It's a good idea that Jethro had. But there's always this tension in the story between a family, because that's what they were. Hebrews were a family nation, and being some sort of nation that is multicultural, for instance. They're not that. They were a family.
Right.
And that's what tied them together. So somehow when they did things, it had to be in the context of a family. And that's why they've survived, because they're a family. All the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, that's the family God, right?
Yeah.
And this family is going to do business this way. He wasn't trying to instill a king here. He was
Right.
saying, use the family together. And Moses is particularly gifted in this, and I've been talking to him, so use him as so there's always that tension here in the story in Israel, family and nation. He never wanted a king.
Right.
No. God.
Well, and I think what this also leaves room for is a little bit of friction, which is not a bad thing, especially within a family. But like, friction actually helps us to grow, to smooth some of the rough edges over, right? So, yeah.
All right, we got questions. So we've already talked about, and it's, listen or choose good people to be you're surrounded by. So Moses had Jethro as counsel, and he gave him really good advice. So the kind of takeaways would be, choose wise. Oh, that's what I didn't talk about. That's what I really wanted to talk about. Jethro says the people that you're going to select in your leadership are honest, won't take a bribe, and are godly men. That was a huge line that I read. I'm like, yeah, it's very careful who you choose in your leadership positions, because three things he said: godliness, honesty, and they won't take a bribe.
Yeah. We don't just appoint leaders because we need them and there's someone available.
Right.
We vet them. We were speaking earlier about how you became the bishop, and there's a long process that takes place there. And so, we do well to follow that advice when we're looking to install leaders. I see in the notes here, listen to your wife as a potential takeaway, and I think there's great value to that. Listen to the people in your life, for sure.
Your wife.
I actually think of before when we uncovered our call to move to Quebec. About 3 months before that was fully uncovered, in conversation, Michelle said to me, because we were just reevaluating everything and thinking and everything was on the table. And Michelle said, what do you think about going to Cape and Ray, Quebec? And I said, oh, that would be the dumbest thing that we could do as a family. That's the worst decision that we could possibly make. I actually said those words. And then fast forward 3 months, and God was, I finally heard God saying to me, hey, this is where I'm pushing you. And then we had a conversation, and
she was right.
She was right.
She was
the
right.
whole time.
I like Michelle.
Yep.
I like her.
She often is right.
And there's good give and take in there, because they listened to Moses too, right? There was this, and the father-in-law, he's huge.
Yeah.
Everyone should listen to their father-in-law.
That's right.
Josh.
All right. Well, that leads us to our final question, which is, how does this story or these stories help to fulfill the story of God throughout the rest of the Bible?
Now, this I didn't write as much. Usually I kind of have an idea of what I'm going to say. So we've already talked about find wise counsel, listen to your wise counsel, and choose godly people and honest people to be your delegation. And then we're also talking about helpers last week, and the word ezer, which means God, or it has meant that God is helping us. So that's what we can kind of take away, is God is going to be our helper, and we need to accept that and believe that.
Yeah.
So.
And I think we see as well that the help will come from unlikely places at times. The Midianites were not a place where Moses might have thought that he was going to be receiving help. And then also, just as Bishop Cliff was talking about, that we are a family, and we as a continuation of Israel, as the church, are a family, and that means that there are many voices within our family, and some maybe rub us the wrong way, but there's great value to listening, and we do better to be a people who listen well to those around us and grow alongside of those who we've been placed into family with.
Those are great. I think those are exactly right. And I would add something that you referred to earlier on. There are these motifs in these stories that we have to pay attention to. For instance, 40.
Right.
You know, those are interesting numbers. They're like ancient emojis. You know, they couldn't underline or italics or bold the script, but they could add numbers like 6 or 7 or 40. And when we see these numbers, when we pay attention to those numbers, it's God saying, hey, something's happening. And 40 is a preparation time. You know, there's something there in that story. And God used, and it's never, you know, you have to wait 40 years and
Moses
400
is gone
years.
for 40 years. Israel's in the desert for 40 years. 400 years in Israel. Jesus, the desert for 40 years.
400
40
years
days,
between the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Yeah.
All these waiting periods where, you know, we expect God, and it's never that in Scripture. And there's this beauty. Well, Moses was an old dude by the time he got going. And
Shout out to the old dudes.
yeah, there it is.
All right. Well, good answers, guys. That's all that we have for today. So it was great to have you here.
Thanks so much for
Thanks
listening.
for joining, Dad.
Thank you.
Thank you, honey.
Hopefully we'll have her on, have you on soon again.
That's right.
All right.
Bye
Well,
for
have a
now.
great
Bye for
week.
now.
Bye-bye.